I didn't want to be there. Not that night. Not in that place. Not sitting across from the very people who seemed to take pride in pretending everything was fine. My parents had insisted on a birthday dinner. They said 27 was special, a milestone that deserved more than a quiet night at home. I had suggested takeout, something simple, but they wouldn't hear of it. "You only turned 27 once," my mother said. I didn't argue, though deep down I wished I had. Don't miss the twist. Like this story and follow me before I share the next part. By the time I slipped on my black dress, the one I kept for interviews and rare occasions, I felt like I was dressing up for someone else's life. The heels were worn at the edges, their straps stretched thin from years of walking across streets I could barely afford to live on. As I left my apartment, I caught myself calculating the cost of the cab ride versus the bus. In the end, I chose the cab, silently justifying that it was my birthday, even though I knew I would regret it the next morning. The restaurant was everything I wasn't. Chandeliers sparkled above crisp white tablecloths. Waiters floated through. The room with trays balanced perfectly, their practiced smiles hiding judgment for people like me who couldn't possibly afford to be here without someone else's money. When the hostess led me to the table, I saw the bottle of champagne already waiting in a bucket of ice. My parents were seated, glowing with the kind of confidence that comes from always assuming life will bend to your will. "You're late," my father said, though it had only been 5 minutes. "I came straight from work," I replied, slipping into my chair. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. "You look nice," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I thanked her, though inside I felt the familiar divide opening between us. They were dressed like people who belonged here. My mother in a silk blouse with a necklace that shimmered with every turn of her head. My father in a tailored suit with gold cufflinks that caught the light. I tugged at the hem of my dress, painfully, aware of how plain it looked against the polished backdrop. The conversation started in the usual way. My father asked about my job search, his tone more polite than interested. I had been laid off 2 weeks earlier when the agency lost its biggest client, but I didn't expect sympathy. "There are always other opportunities," he said dismissively when I admitted how hard it had been. My mother quickly changed the subject to a movie they had seen, their laughter spilling across the table as if my struggles were background noise. I sipped water instead of champagne. Each time the waiter filled my glass, I nodded politely, avoiding his eyes. I thought about the rent due next week, the dwindling balance in my account, the silent panic that followed me everywhere. They didn't ask about that. They never did. When the gifts came, I forced a smile. A designer wallet, a scarf folded neatly in tissue paper. Beautiful, yes, but strangely hollow. My mother explained the importance of building good credit, as though the wallet itself could erase the weight of my student loans. For a moment, I let my gaze drift around the room. Families gathered at tables, voices soft but warm. Couples leaned close, sharing quiet conversations. I felt like an outsider in my own life, an actress trapped in the wrong role. My father launched into a story from his college days, one I had heard before. I nodded, pretending to listen, but my mind wandered back to the card my roommate had given me that morning. Hand-drawn, with a small plant tucked inside. It wasn't expensive, but it was thoughtful. It was real, and somehow it meant more than the scarf now lying in its box beside me. Somewhere between the entrees and dessert, the unease in my chest grew heavier. The champagne, the laughter, the polished surfaces. It all felt staged, as though they were putting on a performance I was forced to applaud. My mother leaned toward me, lowering her voice. "You really should consider saving more," she said. "It's important to plan for the future." I wanted to laugh at the irony. Planning for the future was all I had been doing. Counting every dollar, every meal, every bus fare. But I only nodded, letting her words hang in the air like smoke. That night, as I sat at that table pretending to belong, I felt a shift I couldn't explain. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Like a thread pulling loose from a seam, the beginning of something unraveling. I didn't know then what was coming, or how deep the cracks ran beneath the surface of my family. But I felt it. That low hum of tension, the kind that warns you that the life you're living isn't the one that's truly yours. And so I smiled, I raised my glass when they insisted on a toast, and I told myself it was only a dinner. Just one more night to get through. I didn't yet realize it was the night that would change everything. I had grown used to struggling. It wasn't something I wore like a badge of honor, but more like a second skin I couldn't shed. Every decision I made seemed to be filtered through the question, can I afford this? Or will it leave me short for rent? That kind of life turns you cautious, even when you want to believe you're moving forward. My parents had always framed it as building character. When I graduated from art school with nearly $70,000 in student loans, they clapped politely at the ceremony and handed me a book about financial discipline. No offers of help, no safety net, just the assurance that struggle was good for me. I told myself I agreed with them. I told myself I wanted to prove I could stand on my own, and for years I almost believed it. The reality was far less romantic. My 2-bedroom apartment was old and run down, its walls patched with layers of paint that never quite covered the cracks. I shared it with Olivia, my roommate and friend since college, who understood better than anyone what it meant to scrape by. She worked long shifts at a local bookstore, and I worked in a small graphic design agency downtown. We paid the bills by combining our rent, buying furniture secondhand, and making dinner from whatever was on sale that week. I picked up some noodles, Olivia would say when she came home, dropping a grocery bag on the counter. 3 nights of dinner, $6. We would laugh, but underneath was the quiet truth. Every dollar mattered. I remember sitting on our old couch one night, flipping through job boards with a knot in my stomach, and hearing the muffled sound of my parents on speakerphone bragging about their kitchen remodel. New countertops, high-end appliances, a pool in the backyard that needed servicing. I pressed mute on the call and stared at the wall, wondering how they could live in such comfort while insisting my hardships were necessary. Still, I pushed on. I worked overtime when I could, took freelance projects, skipped lunches, and told myself it was temporary. Success was coming. The problem was, success never seemed to arrive. Just when I started to feel like I was making progress, the agency lost its biggest client. 5 of us were laid off in a single morning. I remember packing my things into a cardboard box, trying to stay composed and telling myself that people lose jobs all the time. But walking out of that building, I felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. That week, the phone calls from my parents became more insistent. They wanted me to come to dinner, to celebrate turning 27 in style. I tried to explain that I wasn't in the mood, that things were too tight right now. "Nonsense," my father said. "It's just a rough patch. You'll be fine." My mother added, "Besides, we've already made the reservation. You'll love it." I didn't argue further, though I wanted to. Instead, I hung up and stared at the blank wall above my desk, a reservation at a restaurant where the menu had no prices, while I was lying awake at night wondering if I'd have enough to cover my bills. It felt cruel in a way I couldn't quite name. The signs had been there, though I ignored them. The way my dad shut down the conversation when I once mentioned pursuing a master's degree, as though my ambitions were inconvenient. The way my mom changed the subject whenever I brought up financial stress. The hushed phone calls that went silent the moment I walked into the room. And that afternoon, I'd caught her browsing real estate listings in Panama, closing the laptop quickly when I asked what she was doing. She had laughed it off, called it daydreaming, but something in her tone had unsettled me. The truth was, I wanted to believe in them. I wanted to believe that my parents, for all their flaws, still cared about my well-being. So I swallowed the discomfort, pushed aside the suspicion, and kept working to survive. Every morning, I put on a smile that didn't reach my eyes, walked into interviews with hope I didn't really feel, and told Olivia that everything would be fine. "You'll land something better," she told me one night as we ate ramen on the couch. "You always do." Her faith in me was touching, but it also deepened my guilt. Because while she saw someone capable, I felt like I was barely holding myself together. By the time my birthday dinner approached, I was exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. It was the exhaustion of pretending, of holding up a life. That felt increasingly hollow. I didn't know then that my unease wasn't just about money or work or failure. It was about the foundation of my life, the cracks beneath the surface that were waiting for the right moment to split wide open. When I stood in front of the mirror that night, adjusting the black dress that had seen too many interviews, I thought, the worst I'd have to endure was another round of subtle criticism and forced celebration. I didn't realize I was walking into a confrontation that would shatter every illusion I still held about my parents. I smoothed the fabric of my dress one last time, slipped on the old heels, and whispered to myself, just get through the night. But deep inside, a quiet voice I had been ignoring all these years was whispering something else. Maybe it was finally time to stop pretending that struggle was the life I deserved. The moment he walked in, the room shifted. Walter didn't have to raise his voice or command attention. His presence alone was enough. Diners straightened in their seats, waiters moved with sharper precision, and my parents froze mid-conversation, their laughter cut short. I felt it too. That sudden heaviness, like the air had thickened. He moved slowly but with purpose, his tall frame still steady at 82. His silver hair caught the light beneath the chandeliers, and the suit he wore was immaculate as though tailored for this exact night. Behind him trailed Jennifer, his assistant, sharp and precise, tablet in hand, her face unreadable. I stood automatically as he reached our table. "Happy birthday, Caitlin," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. His cologne smelled faintly of cedar and leather, familiar and expensive. "Thank you, Grandpa," I replied, caught off guard by how genuine my voice sounded. For all his sternness, he had always treated me differently than the rest. He sat beside me, ignoring my father's attempt at a nervous greeting. "I wanted to check in on how things are going," he said, studying me with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I nodded politely, unsure how to answer. Then he glanced at Jennifer, who tapped something on her tablet. "The quarterly reports for your portfolio look strong. The trust should be performing well in this market." I froze. "My portfolio?" His brow furrowed. "Yes, the trust fund established when you were born. You turned 25 2 years ago, so everything should have been transferred into your control by now." The words struck me like a blow. I blinked at him, trying to process what he was saying. Across the table, my parents had gone pale, their hands suddenly rigid around their cutlery. I don't have a trust fund," I said slowly, turning. From him to them, Walter's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Of course you do," he said quietly. $5 million initially, plus growth. Managed by your parents until your 25th birthday. That was the agreement. Silence spread across the table like a spill. My mother's face drained of color, her knuckles white against the stem of her wineglass. My father shifted in his seat, tugging at his cufflinks. I shook my head. "No one ever told me." Walter's gaze moved from me to them, deliberate, heavy. "And the apartment?" he asked casually, though there was nothing casual about his tone. "The 2-bedroom in Lakeside Tower. Is it comfortable?" The words left my body before I could stop them. "What apartment?" The sound of cutlery, clattering against porcelain, broke the silence. My parents' faces betrayed them instantly. My mother looked as though she might be sick, while my father's eyes darted anywhere but toward me. Walter leaned back in his chair, his expression calm in a way that felt far more dangerous than anger. "You don't know about the apartment?" he said. It wasn't a question. I stared at him, my heart racing. "No," I whispered. He turned back to my parents, his voice dropping to a quiet tone that made the hair on my arms rise. "Then where did the money go?" My father swallowed hard. "Walter, there's been a misunderstanding. We can explain—" "I sincerely hope so," Walter interrupted, still calm, his gray eyes sharp as steel. He didn't look at me now. He didn't need to. His attention was fixed squarely on them. Jennifer stepped forward slightly, phone already in her hand. "Would you like me to call Stanley?" she asked. "Already," Walter replied, his eyes never leaving my parents. The waitstaff lingered nearby, clearly aware something unusual was happening. I could feel the stares from other tables, the curiosity of strangers watching our private implosion unfold in public. I pulled my hand away when my mother reached for it. "Caitlin, sweetheart, this isn't how we wanted you to find out," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Find out what?" My voice broke as I raised it for the first time that night. "That I have a trust fund? That I was supposed to have? An apartment? That all this time I was working overtime and skipping meals, while you let me believe there was nothing?" My father leaned forward, his voice low and strained. "This isn't the place to discuss family matters." Walter's head turned sharply, his voice cutting like ice. "I agree. Jennifer, arrange for a private room. Within minutes, we were being escorted down a quiet hallway, away from the chandeliers and polished tables, into a wood-paneled room, with a long empty table that felt more like a courtroom than a dining space. Walter sat at the head, I to his right, my parents across from me. Jennifer stood near the door, tablet poised, her face professional and blank. I sat in silence, my chest tight, while Walter folded his hands neatly on the table. "Caitlin deserves answers," he said, his voice measured. "All of them." My father shifted again, his voice cracking. "There were investments, things that didn't perform as expected. The money is just temporarily allocated elsewhere." Walter's gaze cut into him. "Allocated where?" Tears slipped down my mother's cheeks. "There were financial difficulties after the recession. We had to make adjustments." I felt heat rise to my face. "Adjustments?" My voice shook with disbelief. "I lived on ramen noodles while you remodeled your kitchen. I worked 2 jobs while you took vacations. You let me think I was alone." The weight of the room pressed down on me. My whole life, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, suddenly looked different. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't just the cost of independence. It was betrayal. Walter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was more frightening than rage. "Then we will see exactly what happened," he said. "Stanley will bring the documents. And until then, nothing moves." I looked across the table at my parents, the people I had trusted most. Their faces, pale and drawn, told me everything before another word was spoken. Nothing would ever be the same. The private dining room felt colder than the restaurant outside, as though the walls themselves knew they were about to witness something unthinkable. I sat rigid in my chair, the glass of water in front of me untouched. Walter leaned back at the head of the table, his posture calm but unyielding. Across from me, my parents looked smaller than I had ever seen them. It wasn't long before Stanley arrived. He was a man I had only seen briefly at family gatherings, always carrying the same worn leather briefcase. Tonight, he set it carefully on the table, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, and nodded respectfully toward Walter. "I brought the original trust documents," he said, his voice even, "as well as the most recent statements." Walter gestured toward me. "Start at the beginning. She deserves the truth." Stanley opened the briefcase and pulled out a neat stack of papers. He slid the first toward me. "When you were born, your grandfather established a trust fund in your name," he began. $5 million initially, with your parents named as trustees until your 25th birthday. The terms were clear. The money could be used only for your education, health, or welfare. All expenditures were to be documented. At 25, the trust would transfer fully into your control. I stared at the pages, my eyes blurring with disbelief. "And no one thought to tell me?" Stanley glanced toward my parents before answering. "They were instructed to inform you when you turned 18. Clearly, that did not happen." Walter's voice was like steel. "Nor did the transfer at 25. I looked at my mother, who dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. My father's hands shook slightly as he reached for his water glass. For once, he had nothing rehearsed to say. Walter's eyes flicked back to Stanley. "What is the current value of Caitlin's trust?" Stanley pulled another document from his briefcase, sliding it across the polished wood. "As of the last quarterly report, approximately $8.3 million. That figure accounts for the original principal, investment growth, authorized withdrawals for her tuition, and the purchase of a property in Lakeside Tower 2 years ago." My throat tightened. $8 million? The number felt unreal, impossible. While I was working double shifts, while I was borrowing money to cover rent, there were millions in my name. Stanley nodded gravely. Walter's expression never wavered. "Show me the withdrawals." The attorney laid out more sheets, each line item a cold record of decisions made without me. Tuition payments, I remembered. A lump sum for the apartment I had never seen. Then larger amounts, numbers that meant nothing to me but told a devastating story. 7 years ago, Stanley said, his finger tapping the page, "We see the beginning of irregular transfers. Large sums diverted to personal accounts belonging to Harold and Diane. These were not authorized under the terms of the trust." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I reached for the papers. "How much?" Stanley hesitated. Based on this review, approximately 8 million has been reduced to just over 300,000. The room tilted. My breath caught in my chest. 300,000, I repeated, my voice barely audible. That's all that's left? Walter's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. His calm was terrifying. Where is the money now? My father shifted, his voice breaking. Some of it went to pay the mortgage, some for cars, renovations. My mother interrupted, her voice sharp with desperation. Investments that didn't work out. We thought we could replace it. We never meant... You remodeled your kitchen with my money? My voice cracked. I felt heat rise to my face. I worked 2 jobs through college, ate ramen for dinner, while you were living in a house I unknowingly paid for? My father's head dropped. We always intended to pay it back. Walter's voice sliced through the room. This is theft. It wasn't stealing, my mother insisted, tears spilling down her face. We're her parents. We were looking out for her future. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. By letting me panic about rent? By watching me drown in student loans while you vacationed in Europe? How exactly was that looking out for me? Silence followed, broken only by the sound of Jennifer placing a glass of water in front of me. My hand shook so badly I couldn't lift it. Walter finally turned to Stanley. Freeze all their assets, effective immediately. I want a forensic accounting of every dollar. Already in progress, Stanley replied. My father's voice rose in panic. Walter, please. This is a family matter. There's no need to escalate. Walter leaned forward, his eyes like ice. You watched your daughter struggle while you lived on stolen money. Do not lecture me about family. My mother reached across the table again, her hand shaking. Caitlin, we're sorry. Truly. We thought we could manage it. We thought you were fine on your own. I pulled back, the words slicing me open. You let me believe I was alone. The weight of it sank in. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every time I believed I wasn't good enough. It wasn't just life being hard, it was deliberate. They had stolen not only my security, but years of my life. Walter's voice softened as he turned to me. You will get answers, Caitlin, and you will get justice. I nodded, unable to speak, tears burning at the edges of my vision. For the first time in my life, I saw my parents not as pillars, but as strangers, people capable of taking everything while pretending to give me nothing. And in that moment, the bond between us fractured into something I knew would never be whole again. The night after the dinner, I sat in my apartment surrounded by silence. The walls felt closer than usual, the air heavier. Olivia sat beside me on the couch, a blanket around my shoulders, saying nothing. She didn't need to. I had told her. Everything in a broken stream of sentences. The trust, the apartment, the millions that were gone. By the time I stopped, my throat was raw, and the tea she had made sat untouched on the table. I can't believe it, I whispered finally, staring at the floor. She squeezed my hand. I can, she said softly. They always looked at you, like you were on your own. Her words hurt, because they were true. For years, I had explained away my parents' distance as tough love. Now I saw it for what it was. Indifference, and worse, selfishness. The following days blurred together. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from my parents, each one more desperate than the last. At first, they tried to explain, talking about bad investments, about temporary loans, about how they meant to pay it back. Then came apologies, long emails written in the language of regret, but without the weight of real accountability. Finally, the tone shifted to begging. Please answer, my mother wrote. We can fix this. We're still your parents. I didn't reply. Every message felt like a knife twisting deeper. Walter was steady throughout. His assistant, Jennifer, called daily with updates. The forensic team is working around the clock, she told me one morning, her voice calm as always. They've confirmed both houses, and the vehicles were purchased with trust funds. Recovery efforts are underway. I listened numbly, nodding though she couldn't see me. None of it made sense yet. The numbers, the properties, the stolen years. It was too big, too overwhelming, but the weight of it followed me everywhere. On the bus, I replayed every moment when my parents had dismissed me, every time they said struggle was good for me, every new car they drove home in, every vacation they boasted about. I remembered standing in the cold outside my first apartment, begging them for help with the security deposit, and hearing my father say, "It's time you learn to handle things on your own." Meanwhile, my money was sitting in their account. Anger came in waves. Some nights, I paced the apartment, whispering accusations into the dark. Other nights, I sat motionless, too drained even to cry. "You'll get through this," Olivia reminded me gently. "This isn't the end of you." But it felt like it. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. My parents had watched me drown, not because they couldn't save me, but because they chose not to. A week later, Walter invited me to his penthouse. I hesitated, but I went. The space was vast, walls of glass looking over the city, yet it was quieter than I expected. He dismissed the staff and poured 2 drinks himself. For a man who had built empires, it was a strangely intimate gesture. "You must know this isn't your fault," he said firmly, setting a glass in front of me. "I keep thinking I should have noticed," I admitted. "All those signs, the trips, the house, how could I not see it?" Walter leaned back, his expression softening for the first time. "You had no reason to suspect your own parents of theft? That kind of betrayal doesn't occur to us until it happens." I nodded, swallowing hard. It was strange hearing that word spoken aloud. Betrayal. But it fit. Leaving his penthouse that night, I felt a shift. Small, but real. The money was gone, yes. My trust in my parents was shattered. But something remained. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt before. I saw now who had truly stood by me. Olivia, who shared her groceries and her couch. Walter, who had protected my future even if I didn't know it. And me, the version of myself that had endured it all, who had kept moving even when it felt impossible. That realization didn't heal the wound, but it gave me something to hold on to. Because once betrayal is named, you stop mistaking it for care. The next morning, as I made coffee in my small kitchen, I caught myself whispering, "They don't get to define me." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even closure. It was survival, and maybe the first step towards something more. Months passed, though at first, time felt frozen. Every meeting with attorneys, every document signed, every late-night call from Jennifer was another reminder of what had been taken. Yet slowly, the shape of my life began to change. The recovery? Efforts didn't bring everything back. Most of the money was gone, lost to houses, cars, vacations, and investments that had collapsed long before I knew they existed. But some remained, enough to build from, enough to give me a foundation I had never truly had. With Walter's guidance, I moved into a modest 1-bedroom apartment. Not the luxury property that had been purchased in my name, but one I chose, myself. It was small, but it was secure. The lease was signed under my name, the keys placed directly in my hand. For the first time, I stepped into a space that was mine not because someone else allowed it, but because I had claimed it. I remember standing in the empty living room on the first night, the hum of the city outside, my boxes stacked against the wall. There were no chandeliers, no expensive furniture, no grand gestures, just space, quiet and honest. I realized then how much I craved simplicity. Work came slowly at first. Interviews led to polite rejections, but then a position opened at a respected design firm, one with better pay and room to grow. Walter had made the introduction, but the job itself I earned. That mattered to me. After so many years of struggling, I wanted to prove that I was more than the story of what had been stolen. Each morning, I walked into that office with a new steadiness. I designed, I collaborated, I stayed late not out of desperation, but because I wanted to. The work didn't erase the pain, but it gave me purpose. Outside of work, I kept my circle small. Olivia remained my anchor, the one person who had never left. My cousin Natalie surprised me too. For years, I had resented her trust fund, her lifestyle, the way she flaunted it all. But when the truth came out, she reached out. She admitted she had always envied what she thought I had: loving parents, stability. She confessed her own loneliness, hidden behind the photographs of vacations and shopping trips. One afternoon, over coffee in my new apartment, she looked at me with tearful eyes. "I thought you had the family I wanted. I never knew they were taking from you." Her honesty cracked something open in me. We began talking more, slowly shifting from distant relatives to something closer to friendship. Meanwhile, my parents faded into the background of my life. Their calls still came, their apologies, their pleas. I answered some, ignored others. I allowed them no control, no access to what remained of my security. They had chosen their path. I was choosing mine. So betrayal lingered, of course. Some nights, it hit me in waves. The thought of years lost, the struggles I should never have endured. But alongside the grief came something unexpected. Resilience. I had survived it, and I was learning to live beyond it. 6 months after that birthday dinner, Walter invited me again. This time, the tone was different. He gathered a few of us. Jennifer, Stanley, Natalie, even Olivia. Over dinner, he raised a glass. 6 months ago, the truth came to light, he said. Tonight, we celebrate not the loss, but what has been built since. After dinner, he handed me a small box. Inside was a set of keys, not to the luxury apartment that had been sold, but to the modest place I had already chosen. He had purchased it outright, transferring the deed into my name. "This one," he said simply, "is yours." No shadows, no lies. Tears filled my eyes, not because of the apartment itself, but because of what it symbolized. A clean break, a chance to build without stolen foundations. That night, as I walked home with the keys in my hand, I realized something. Betrayal had shaped me, yes, but it didn't define me. The life ahead was mine to create on terms no one else could steal. And for the first time in years, I felt not just relief, but hope. The story may be over, but the conversation starts now. Comment your reaction, and don't forget to like and follow.